Okay. Well, because it's a little bit after 12, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here with us on your lunch hours. I really appreciate that. I'm Leslie Johnston. And I know that for some of you folks, this is maybe the only break you're going to get in your day today. So that's fantastic that you chose to spend it with us. I really appreciate that. Today is a little bit of a different lunch and learn for those of you who've been with us for those before. If you've been following us on social media, you probably noticed that we got a little cheeky with it and we're calling it a launch and learn. And that's because today is the official launch of the Attachment Network's new podcast series, and we're super excited about it. So I'm so glad you guys joined us for that. The podcast series is going to be available on Apple, Spotify, Google Play. And if you don't have any of those, or if some of the folks that you work with don't have access to any of those, you'll also be able to access it right on our website. So that link will be up there as well. The series itself is based on the network's 10 Things project, and some of you are already a little bit familiar with that. It's a podcast about parenting, but with a twist, because as some of you know, the advice is coming from the voice or the perspective of the child in this case. So it's a little bit of a different way to look at the experience of parenting. And so this summer, our two guests today, Dr. Sayma Malik and Laurie McPherson, two longtime members of the Attachment Network family, graciously agreed to spend a really good chunk of their summer sitting here in my den recording this podcast, and I'm so grateful that they did. I feel really honored to have been the fly on the wall, listening to the conversations that these women had, which are amazing. I know you're going to enjoy them as much as I did. And so before I go any further, I want to introduce these two amazing ladies. Welcome, Dr. Malik, and welcome, Laurie. Thanks for being here today and giving up a little bit more of your time. I'm wondering do you guys want to just take a couple of minutes and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and, the kind of work that you do, what your involvement has been with the network, and, why the heck you wanted to spend your summer doing this?
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to start. I guess I'll start since I'm already talking. I'm a psychologist, and I was an active board member with the network up until I think maybe a year or so ago, when for just commitment to family and just juggling life as a professional with two young children, it was just a little too much to commit to those volunteer hours outside of everything else. And so when we had already been in talks of doing this podcast, and then of course I had some unexpected events that pulled me away from being able to do that previously. So when I stepped down from the board as a member, and we revisited this topic, it was so near and dear to me. So of course I was very excited to revisit the discussion and actually make a plan. And I think in the interim you had, trained yourself on recording equipment and et cetera. And so we had a little bit more to work with to get going. And so this gives me an opportunity to stay connected to the network, which is partly why I'm very invested in this. And also just to be part of something from the ground up, to be able to create something and say, what do we think families really would benefit from hearing and being reminded of? And where do they need more support? I think that was one of my reasons for wanting to be involved in this project. And so a little bit about me. I am a child psychologist. I am at the Child Development Clinic at Sky Center, part of the Department of Clinical Psychology, but in a consultant role here at the clinic. I work with lots of families with young children. So our clinic sees children 0 to 5, mostly in the preschool age range. And so often, and we offer, I often see kids with complex presentations where there's a question about diagnosis. Maybe it's clarifying, is this autism, anxiety, and or a learning problem, and or some mix of social emotional challenges as well with family or parents. And so often our assessments will include some component of relationship assessment to look at attachment and offer some thoughts on that. And we do try to offer the Circle of Security parent group as well on a somewhat recurrent basis. It's sort of with COVID, it's been a moving target in terms of thinking about how to offer and how to juggle all the different demands and needs of safety and then offering resources to families. And so we're excited to be able to offer that more regularly now that I think, feeling more comfortable with in-person meetings, especially in group format. So that's something to look for. And I'm hoping more community agencies will be following suit. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sayma. So I'm Laurie McPherson, and I want to welcome all of you to the Lunch and Learn today. It's wonderful to have you join us, and we do really appreciate your time. So I hope you can just kind of settle in and enjoy the pretty informal discussion, I think, today. But it is an exciting time for the network, and very happy to have been approached to participate in developing these podcasts. I've been involved with the network. I'm not even sure how many years, but I know it's over 10, so I'll just say 10 plus. And what interested me, maybe too many of these, I might not want to add them all up, right? But it does go back, and what interested me most about the network is my field of work has really been about promoting positive mental health. And I have a sociology background. I'm very, very interested
just a second, Drew, just 1 second.
In relationships and just the importance of that, and knowing just how much. Sorry, we have some folks that need to. So just a reminder, if you could, to put yourself on mute, that would be helpful. Thanks. Sorry. So I currently work for the Canadian Mental Health Association, Manitoba and Winnipeg office here based in Winnipeg. And I'm working to support research and evaluation within that organization. And my work over the years has been, as I said, about promoting mental health. And so that's in early years, really across the lifespan. So did some work on perinatal mental health and within education settings, within different health and social service settings. Family resource centers are somewhat familiar with me because I've done training over the years in different programming, such as Handle with Care and reaching out resiliency training. And all of these pieces really are there to help help us just be our best selves, and being our best selves most often involves good, healthy relationships, and that, as we know, is really important. The earlier we start, the better. And so very committed to doing what we can to create an awareness of that, to create education and knowledge about how we can support positive relationships. And that's what's brought me to stay involved with the network over the years in different projects, going back to, in fact, the creation of the brochures, which many of us on this call had some role to play in developing those brochures. And what was really neat when we were doing the podcast is that we were saying, wow, this is still really good stuff. Like, there wasn't much we would actually be changing. Those points that we made, we spent a lot of time discerning what should be included in those brochures, and it was very validating to know that those concepts, those ideas and important features of attachment and how we support attachment in children throughout those developmental stages is still very relevant and so forth, even though all of these other things change in our lives and we have to deal with pandemics and all kinds of things. Those things remain important and in supporting relationships. Aside from that, I have 3 adult children, so just a wee bit of parenting experience behind me, and I have a grandson, so a little bit of that sprinkled in there too, which I think, as most of you who are parents will probably say that had a lot to do with your learning as well. And so that's part of my picture of who I am as well. So thanks again for the opportunity to be involved in the podcast and for being able to have a nice conversation with you about it today.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Dr. Malik. I just want to acknowledge too, when Laurie talks about, the development of those original brochures, the idea of putting this in the voice of the child actually goes back even further. It goes back to the two videos that the Attachment Network did even before that. And we actually have one of the founding members of the network here with us today, Laurie Marcella. So I want to give her a shout out because she was on the ground floor for those videos. And that's kind of what jump-started that idea of, giving advice from the child's perspective and in their voice. So thanks for being with us today too. And so for people who aren't familiar with those, the brochures were, 10 things your baby wants you to know, your toddler, your school-age child, your teenager. So, one for each of those. And so there's one podcast episode for each of those developmental stages. And then also, for when we branched out to 10 things your foster child wants you to know, your child with FASD, and then 10 things to know when you're a separated parent or when you're co-parenting. And so, the idea of putting these into podcast format and sort of expanding those conversations really was part of the network's thinking about how do we pivot? Like, how do we, do some things that are more accessible, that people can access anytime of the day or night. They don't have to be anywhere in person. We're really not in a place where we're comfortable again hosting those conferences where there's 300 people, all crammed into a room. So, it was, the idea was part of that pivot. But I think just also, coming out of the idea that there really was a need for some common sense conversations about parenting, but with a nice, attachment base, if you will. And, we knew from the videos and the brochures that child's voice, or perspective really was something that tends to catch people's interest. So we hope it does in these expanded conversations too. I'm wondering, because I'm curious, Laurie and Dr. Malik, why don't we start out by just wondering if either of you have like a favorite episode, of the 8 that we did, or even if you have a favorite kind of, piece of the conversation that you recall where you kind of thought, yeah, this, I love that. I'm glad we included that. I'm glad that's in there. Anybody have any, just, off the top of your heads, any thoughts?
First, I wondered if we could, I really appreciate everyone being here, and I really appreciate your respectful, using my formal title, but I'm wondering if we can be less formal today and just, if you can call me Sayma, that would be great. Yes, and I mean, that's how we refer, you refer to me all the time. So I think I would feel more comfortable, actually, to be honest. I know in the podcast we do that, and I think for the listeners that helps sometimes for them to feel like maybe this is a little more credible. I know we use it strategically. And I know I had some questions about, should other people be a guest speaker on the series as well. And so I wondered if we wanted to mention that was part of our conversation. And then we also thought about like the order of the sequence of the topics. So when you asked if there a moment that stands out, the most important part of that question is, do I remember? As a parent with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, I often am not sleeping enough and I'm very busy. And so I think probably the one that stands out the most is the toddler episode, because that's sort of the period of development that I'm living these days. And some of those points really speak to me at this current time in my life and a family development stage. So I know that I can really relate to the topics we talked about. And we also talked about how that toddler brochure really extends into the preschool age, and the school age one doesn't quite, it's really is more developmentally advanced than the preschool age. So we kind of thought about, we made that disclaimer, I think, at the beginning of that episode, that we are really thinking about preschool age as well. And so again, because that's where I'm at, I feel like that's what stands out to me.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because the toddler one, I think was my favorite too. And I don't know, maybe it's because is everybody who's ever been a parent just so glad they survived the toddler years? I don't maybe that's what it was. But what I remember from that episode that really struck me is that you guys talked about how hard toddlers are working. in those years. And I thought that was a really different way to look at it. I'd never really thought of it in those terms before, but these little guys are working their butts off, right? Working, just learning stuff and figuring how to do stuff. But then you added that, you know, it's also a developmental stage that's really hard, or that can be really hard for the people who are parenting those toddlers and those little ones, and just kind of trying to, you know, keep their sanity and their wits about them. So that's interesting. Yeah, that one stuck out for me too. How about you, Laurie? Does anything stick out for you?
Well, I would have to agree with you that the toddler conversation was very rich. I think we did just have a lot to say in that episode. I think we identified with a lot in terms of things that we have experienced as parents, but of course, very much also in supporting other families and parents and the things that we know that they struggle with and that they have questions about. And I think the other point we made in the episode has to do with the rapid change that the family is going through. So this little person goes from from crawling or maybe just starting to walk to just ripping through alphabets and doing all kinds of things in such a short period of time. It's like this time warp. So I think we made the comment that, just kind of when you start to feel like you have your bearings straight or you understand what's happening, there's an upping of the ante and you've got to try, getting to know the next stage. And so it is demanding in that sense for parents. And, maybe it's the time that they really best learn, get lots of opportunities to learn how to read cues because they're just happening so rapidly and changing so fast. So that was a very rich conversation for sure. Just to add to it, I would say the conversation around teens was also one of my favorites because it's one we don't often have. So a conversation around how do you support attachment in that teen parent caregiver relationship, and looking at it, what does that look like in real terms? Again, dealing with all of the things that an adolescent is again going through and the changes that they're experiencing, and how can we be with them in that experience. So, we talked about people having your back and being able to walk alongside your adolescent, even though there might be this disconnect. Well, you don't understand me, or you don't know, things weren't like this when you were my age. And, there's lots of things we can put up as barriers. And so thinking about how can we reduce and get rid of those barriers to bring yourselves closer to understanding one another and having that secure attachment relationship and all the things you might be able to consider doing. And again, the thing that always seems to come back to those simple everyday things. And I have always loved that phrase because it's very grounding for me to think about, okay, it's not the big, wonderful, flamboyant things. It's just being here in this present moment with this person, whatever age they are. And I think that's a really profound and consistent concept for me with attachment, just being present in that moment with that person, so it's, but yeah, there were lots of good tidbits that percolated throughout the conversation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I want to say something about that, Laurie, but just before I do, I just want to remind everybody, I think it was something that popped up on the screen a little earlier, but in case you missed it, just to remind people that we are recording this Zoom session. So just so everybody has that, so and you have the option to opt out if that's something you're not comfortable with. But Laurie, when you were talking about, we went kind of from toddlers to teens, and as you were talking, I was thinking that was one of the things that the two of you highlighted, I think, throughout the episodes is the concept that, the needs stay the same. Right? That we know that those attachment related needs are exactly the same for the 2-year-old as they are for the 14-year-old. It just looks different. It's just going to manifest itself differently depending on the stage that child is at. And I think you guys did a really nice job of underscoring that and helping people understand that. Do you, like, Sayma, can you think of of some examples, like an example of, you know, let's take this attachment need, you know, whatever that universal need is, and then what's it look like at 2, or what's it look like at 1, or what's it look like at age 15? Any?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I know we spend a lot of time really trying to emphasize this, that that the needs don't change, just that they look different. And so I think one of the things we tried to really, the message we tried to send repeatedly was that we always want to look beyond the behavior. So I think that, you know, what's the underlying need? And I think everyone who really understands attachment in general, attachment needs in general, already subscribes to this notion that there are needs behind the behavior. And so a 2-year-old who is really trying to master a new skill and really doesn't want too much direct guidance, and is getting frustrated, and when we try to offer too much help, it can often backfire, right? And so when we understand the need is, I want to figure this out by myself with a little bit of help. It's a delicate balance, right? So here we are watching, wondering, when do we offer help? When do we say, okay, you're getting frustrated, and then sort of help them through that experience? So I think that's a very common one in toddlerhood. And then as a teenager, it could be they're grumpy because, you know, they come home and they're in a pretty grumpy mood. They're not ready to talk about it, so it's hard to know what the need is. And maybe the need is, I need space to sort out what is going on for me, and know that you're present, you're available when I'm ready, right? That again, it's a similar theme, right? You're available, you're waiting, you're sort of watching for my cues, and we're letting them know I'm here. When you're ready to accept or wanting some extra support, I'm here. And so it might be that confident presence that we provide, that, you know, I can see you're not ready yet to talk about it. Something clearly happened today at school, maybe with one of your friends. Maybe they felt left out and they're not ready to talk about it or figure it out, and they want to process it themselves. But they get the message that when they are ready, we're there, and then we can help work it out with them or think it through. Right. So that's what pops up for me. Laurie, do you have any other thoughts on that?
The thing that's coming to mind, and it's relevant for the day, I think, is that we have to practice these things. They don't just happen, right? So looking for opportunities to practice developing the way to communicate, I'm here for you, or the practice to develop in just small ways of connecting with other people. So I have a couple of examples, and they might seem extremely minor, but I feel like if we really think about them, they are very important. So the other day, a friend popped by, and she had her 15-year-old son in her vehicle, and she was dropping something off to me. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to come and say hi to your person." And she kind of looked at me like, I mean, this person knows me, but not well. And so I said, yeah, he's probably going to be saying, like, what does she want to come and, you know, say hi to me for? But school's starting, and it's a big year ahead, grade 10, whatever. And so I went over and I just had this conversation, and it was very pleasant. And it was honestly, it was my way of saying, you know what, I care about how your year goes, even though I'm not like a super close person in your circle. I know your mom, we're friends. I care about how your year went. I just expressed some interest in their activities and said, yeah, I just wanted to come out and wish you a really good grade 10 year. I know it'll be great, you know, and big smiles. And, you know, I just feel like those are ways that children of all ages, and in this case, a sometimes awkward 15-year-old that we talk about, has an opportunity to say, oh, okay, that kind of went okay. Like, I don't know this person super well, but hey, that was kind of a nice interaction. To me, that builds community and that builds attachment, right? I'm not a person, you know, I'm on the periphery of this person's life, but it's good for them to know, hey, that is part of actually the community. So,
And I see you.
I see you. That's right. You're sitting in the car and looking at your phone, but you know what? I'm thinking about how your year might be, and I'm wanting to wish you well for that. And so I think it's just those things that, those little opportunities that I feel like, because we have been disrupted in terms of our social connections and whatnot over the past 2.5 years, you know, it's okay for us as adults. We've got decades of experience prior to the last 2 years, but when you're 5 or when you're 10, that's a good chunk of your life that's been disrupted, and you may not have had those opportunities, or they may be kind of rusty. And so that is, yeah, that is one thing that comes to mind, is that I feel like it's a responsibility of all of us who are aware and who do value relationships and connections and community to create, an atmosphere and to take advantage of those opportunities, to demonstrate, to practice, to role model, those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Well, and I love the idea of, us thinking about connection and community in the same sentence. I think maybe that's a whole other podcast series. We're going to talk about that later. But the notion that that's how we build community, right? Is a little bit of connection here, a little bit of connection there. Yeah, I love that example. That's very nice.
Yeah, and I think we were trying to be mindful that a lot of the listeners were intending our intended audience, maybe families that, likely have not had a lot of experiences taking their little ones out and had, missed opportunities for play groups and just, again, being in community. So being out at the store and learning how to learn about strangers in your sort of distant presence, sort of like in the produce area, and who's waving at you when you're strapped in the shopping cart, right? And so kids, the pandemic babies and pandemic toddlers have had limited experience. And so I think we tried to weave that in throughout to kind of acknowledge that families are dealing with extra challenges that a lot of us haven't had to face, that have had some opportunity to go to meet other parents and just feel connected to others who can just relate. And so again, another reason why we were so invested in getting this developed and getting the support out there for families. And so so families may not know, oh, this is what lots of kids go through. I don't even know that this is sort of typical, or because they haven't had practice, they don't know what to do when someone's waving at them or trying to say hello. Now that we're doing more stuff, and they might cower or feel really nervous about it, and they may show that need for connection or closeness from the parent more because of those lack of exposures in those early months and years. And so, like you said, Laurie, for a young child, 2 years is a long time. It's a lifetime almost. And for many it was, right? I know my youngest was born in the pandemic. And so with the absence of a structured program that she attends, I think she would look very different socially, right? That she wouldn't have had those exposures. And I know a lot of families have had to struggle with what to do with their little ones, how to give them those exposures outside of structured programs. So, yeah.
And I think we did. I think there were a number of times, throughout the episodes where the two of you talk about the impact of the pandemic. One of the things that jumps to mind is just in even parents' ability to obtain support for themselves, to get help from family and friends and those kind of things. So yeah, I think we certainly did. We heard a lot about that. And as we're talking too, I just wanted to remind everybody of something that we do acknowledge this in the podcast, but want to talk about the fact that we're talking about anyone here who is providing care to a child. So we may sometimes in those episodes say mom or dad, or sometimes we say grandma, whatever, but we want to make sure that everybody understands that it's inclusive of anyone really who is caring for a child. So it can be an early childhood educator. It could be an auntie. It could be a foster parent. So, just to kind of make sure everybody, understands that this applies to anyone really who has a child in their care for whatever period of time. But one of the other things I think that I think was a really consistent theme throughout the episodes, and I think it's one of the most important, and you talked about this a lot, was the idea that parents, so I'm going to use the word parent, but caregiver, whoever, that we don't need to be perfect. And I think we stressed this a lot. We talked about it in a variety of different ways. That one-offs are okay, that it's okay for parents to make mistakes. Does one of you want to talk a little bit more about that or expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I can start with this one. One of the things that jumps to mind is that, a few times I almost said to my kid, or maybe I did say it, be thankful you don't have a perfect parent or one that tries to be perfect or thinks they're perfect, because life is not perfect. So the unrealistic expectation that, that we are perfect caregivers, that we'll respond in the exact, way that we think we should, or that is, textbook case perfect and all that, is just not going to happen. And in fact, what's even more important is knowing how to navigate our humanity in that sense, because we're giving the gift of being able to repair, which we know is such an important part of connection. We're human beings, we make mistakes, we say mean things, we fall short of expectations and all that good stuff. But what do we do with that? So I think that is something that is even more challenging for caregivers to practice and role model and demonstrate, because so few of us have really had those good role models for that. And it's just an amazing experience when you see how that impacts a child in later life. So because my kids are adults, I can give that adult example. And, again, hopefully it's because they saw this work happening somewhere along the way. And my sons are 3 years apart, and so one was 16, one was 19. They needed the car at the same time, did not know the other one had plans to use the car at the same time. Both were dressed in their finest on the way out the door, grabbing the key at the same time with big plans to go out social, and so needless to say, they were both very upset. They were literally on their way out the door and thought they were, very harsh words were exchanged, as you can imagine, because emotions were high. There was a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Investment in this particular moment. And I just sat back. I mean, they're not toddlers, but you sit back and you think, what's going to happen here with this, right? So we sat back, we didn't do anything. And some words were shared that weren't very kind. And somebody, they parted ways and so forth, only for about 2 minutes. And then one of them went to the other one and verbatim said, "I don't like how that went down. That was not okay." And it's very touching to think about, but really that's what repair is, right? It's being able to say in the moment, "Hey, that didn't go so good. I don't feel good about what I just said. I don't feel good about how that interaction happened." And in that moment, as a parent and a caregiver, you're so reassured that they understand that that is a more important skill than ever being able to say you're perfect at something. So that's my personal view of it. And that's what I've seen in my family and in lots of other families and scenarios. So just an example of what a gift it is to, again, not be able to think that we have to be perfect, but that we can accept that we do things, and there's a way out of that. There's a way to say, change the story a little bit, and the story ended, "Hey, you know what? I'll take you where you need to go. We'll figure out, let's make this work." And literally within 2 minutes, they had a plan. Both were happy, left on their merry ways, and I had nothing to do with it. So isn't that what we all strive for?
That's fantastic.
As parents?
Absolutely, Lauren. That's such a great story. And you do have the opportunity to reflect on that because your kids are older. And of course, as a parent of young children, that's my hope. And I see the seeds, that we plant the seeds when we have ruptures. And of course, because they're little and there's a lot of intense emotions a lot of the time around independence, around sharing, a lot of things that haven't been mastered yet, of course. And of course, it's going to go in waves, of course, over the years, the dreaded teenage years. And so I'm, looking forward to it, of course. And so I believe firmly that this is a notion that we want to promote even more strongly than, not just that we don't need to be perfect, but what do we do? We will inevitably make mistakes. I know Circle Security talks about this very strongly in their program for parents. And Dan Siegel talks about this a lot in his books, in his writing. And they even offer stories of their own, imperfections, the times where they have they have recognized that they have really missed the mark and would never promote the things that they've done in that moment, but can recognize that as long as there's repair, ruptures can be healed. And the danger is when we don't get it right and we don't recognize the importance of coming back and circling back and saying, you know, that didn't go so well. I don't like how that felt, or I don't think I handled that well. You know, can we have a do-over? Something like that. You know, I recognize, you know, I'm sorry that I overreacted. I used a very big voice just now, something like that. So when it's a parent, you know, for myself, when I'm frustrated that my toddler is not falling asleep, that's my current frustrations, that it takes a long time at bedtime. And what comes to mind is that book, which I don't currently own, but I remember hearing about it years ago. Does anyone know the name of that title? Go the F to Sleep, right? Something like that. So, you know, and something about, you know, I just love you so much, but will you just go to sleep? And so that I can go on with all my adult things I need to do after bedtime. And so, you know, so I remind myself that I will likely have a big reaction to this, and to be compassionate with myself, that I likely will make some mistakes. And when I do, to forgive myself and to give myself some compassion, and to be able to say, it's okay, we will be fine, we can repair this. And so I know I'm filled with guilt immediately once I have this big reaction, and I want to move towards repair as soon as possible. And I think that, again, this is the part that really I think matters the most, is like, what do we do? Do we help more families recognize that the need is really in the repair? And there's, like you said, Laurie, there's a gift in imperfection, right? That if it's perfect, and it's just like if we're learning a new skill, if we get it right every time, we might imagine that other skills will come to us that easily. And we may think we won't struggle. And what a loss that would be, because then we will have this unrealistic appraisal of situations, because inevitably we will be disappointed, because life can't be that way. And so we give the gift, this is an opportunity to learn about the realities of life, that life is full of disappointments and letdowns. And, you know, your sons having the same, you know, simultaneously have a plan, you know, their own independent plans, and not knowing that they each were excited about their own outing, but it wasn't intentional. It was just the way it worked out, right? Just timing. And so that life can happen like that. You know, you want to go to the park, but oh my goodness, it's forecasting rain, so we just can't go, right? That's just a disappointment. None of us can control that. And we all have to face those disappointments. And I think the more practice we get at that, the more we actually help our kids practice, right? So that word has come up many times, practice, right? That we practice this process of, you know, we made a mistake, we are human. And I think if more families really promote this, then we will probably be seeing more of this. And when the families we work with, that they won't be striving for perfection. They will actually say, you know what, I'm a human being. And of course, sometimes I'll get it right, and sometimes I won't. But the times I won't, I'm not going to try hard not to mess up. I'm going to try hard to get it. But if I don't, I know that I can acknowledge my mistakes and my missteps, and we can figure this out together.
Yeah. You know, Sayma, you made a comment at one of those times when the two of you were talking about those times you described, where it's like, I didn't handle that well, or I as a parent, I don't like how I handled that. I didn't like how that went. I'm feeling awful. I'm feeling guilt. And you said something, and I hope I'm gonna quote you correctly, because it just stuck in my mind. I think it's one of the most important things that you guys said in the entire series. And it was something like, talking to yourself and saying to yourself, I may not have been at my best in that moment, but that was the best I could do at that moment. And I just thought that was beautiful. I mean, when I think of it now, it even, almost makes me want to cry. If my kids were little, I think I would, type it out and put it on my wall, so I could say that to myself once a day. But it was just such a beautiful way, to say, that's okay. That's okay. You did the best you could in that moment. And now, maybe a few minutes later, maybe whenever, I'm going to figure out a way to try and make that better. I'm going to figure out a way to go back and do some repair. But darn it, I did the best I could in that moment because I was stressed, I was overworked, I was running around doing a million things. I had a bad day at work. I'm not feeling well. I'm tired of this COVID, whatever. And so I think that was just a wonderful way to sort of encapsulate it.
Yeah, and I remember that, and and I think that when you're in the period of toddlerhood, and and they're really young, and again working so hard at mastering so many new skills, and development is just exploding. Language, motor skills, toileting, sleep, all of these areas are just changing constantly. And so as a parent, you're being pushed constantly to learn something new or keep up with the new skills that your child is developing, because what was current yesterday is old news, and now you're on today's news, right? And so as a parent, you're constantly having to challenge yourself, and then of course inevitably you will mess up, and then all the things you listed. And I think that that's where that came out of, that we do our best, we try our best, and sometimes our best is just not what our child needs, but it's the best that we can offer. It's not ideal. And I think that was the intent of that message, that we all can relate. And if we let go of this idea that we're not going to mess up, like we don't try to mess up, but we accept that it's an inevitable part of being a human, and especially as a parent of younger children. And I think that's where the self-compassion, forgiveness really comes in, because we might have this idea, especially with social media, that, oh, that family seems to have it all together, because of their posts and their pictures. They're at Disneyland and they seem to have a good time. And they're not showing the pictures of the toddler and preschooler freaking out and at the long lines and the intense heat. And so we live in a culture where we don't get the full picture all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was also where that was stemming from, that we want to really remind families that sometimes the messaging they're getting or receiving isn't necessarily the full story, and they may be evaluating themselves against this unattainable image of parenting. This concept of, like, I have this perfectly curated dinner that comes from, like, that's perfectly made and has all the vegetables and nutrients that my young child needs, and they're actually going to eat it all. Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm so good. I've got this. I've got it nailed down. I work, I exercise. My physical health is amazing, right? So we have these ideas that are just unattainable, right? I don't drink coffee. I don't know this and that. And so we all have to give ourselves some grace and say we're doing our best. And sometimes they're gonna have cereal. I think that's some of the things we talked about. Like, is it okay? Is it okay to say, my child had cereal last night because that's the best I could do?
Best I could do. Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to post on Instagram, but that's the best I could do. And my child was okay and safe and healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend who refers to social media as the highlight reel. And, I think we need to remember that, right? That nobody posts on Instagram that evening that they had that complete meltdown, and so did their kid, right? So, and I'm glad they don't post that, but we have to remember, we're seeing the highlight reel when we look at social media. That's what we're seeing. And so, like, let's not put ourselves up against that and go, well, wow, my life's not like that. So that's a really good reminder, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things I want to say too is that, we have said that this podcast series is, it's about parenting. So it's definitely for parents. But I think we should also say that it's also for professionals. I think if you're someone who's in a position where you're working with families and children, I think, these episodes can be a really good support or a reinforcement to some of the other work that you might be doing with that family. And again, that it's, for professionals like, early childhood educators, those folks as well. So just, want to make sure that that we put that out there as well. And that there's also, of course, a whole bunch of other wonderful resources on our website. Some of you already know that, but if you haven't already taken a look on there, please go and have a look. Any other thoughts, ladies, before we finish up? I know we have a few minutes left. Any other really important things that you want people to know about the podcast or the messaging? Any of that comes to mind?
For myself, I think that it's just an example of how important it is to have the conversations. So it could be conversations within your family, or maybe it's among your peers, or maybe it's among your friends who are caregivers and parents. And I think being able to just share, the struggle, the examples, the way things that are maybe working for you, but coming back to that idea that if we're gentle to ourselves, we're more likely to be gentle with the people in our circle, and that is a healthy response to some of the things that are in our world are pretty harsh. I mean, let's be real. There are some pretty challenging things going on in our world, and our children and families are exposed to that. So I feel like at least in my world, the people around me in my network and in my social circle are very important to me to help me deal with all of that. And it's really nice to know that there is a gentle spot to land there in those relationships. So I hope that the conversation of our podcasts can spur that on and continue to for people, and encourage people to have more of those conversations, so that they can cultivate a really soft place to land as well.
Yeah, and when you say that, I mean, we mentioned self-compassion in some of the episodes, I think. And of course, we don't go into great detail, but when you say soft place to land, that's what I think of. And Kristen Neff, of course, this is her area of research, and so she has her own books on this. I don't even know if she has a podcast series, but I imagine there's something like that probably available. And so I think that would be one of my my last takeaways for this Lunch and Learn, is encouraging for caregivers and parents that exploration of self-compassion, that term, because it's a complex one. And it often, because the world can be so harsh in so many ways, parents often are the first to criticize themselves. And there's lots, and Kristen talks more about this, about why that is. And we want to sort of interrupt that process. So if we model self-compassion for us and we say, okay, you know what? I want my child to be kind with themselves, and I want them to develop this kind voice when they do inevitably make mistakes. And how can I best model this and teach through example, right? So if I make a mistake, instead of berating myself to myself because I think somehow I deserve it, my guilt might be pushing me to do this and cut myself down, but my child is watching and hearing everything that I'm now doing to myself, and may internalize that voice, and that's going against what I'm hoping to teach, right? And so that would be one of my, I don't think we talk to this degree in the podcast in any of them about this, because again, it's a little bit away from the themes that we were discussing, but that would be something I think that, again, could be like a follow-up discussion at some point about what that really looks like, so how do we model that? Of course I made a mistake, or of course you made a mistake. And I think as parents, we actually do a better job being kind to our children, saying, of course you made a mistake. We don't always demonstrate the same kindness to ourselves, yet we want them to be kind with themselves when they do inevitably make a mistake. And so it's an opportunity to look at that maybe mixed messaging that we might be inadvertently sending to kids by cutting ourselves down and by thinking that somehow we don't deserve compassion for our own mistakes. Yeah. So that would be something that I think deserves more thought, more just contemplation. And then, of course, exploration. If people are interested, can look at Kristen Neff's work.
Can you spell that for us, Sayma? Just people really want to, or if you've got a copy of her book, if you can show it to everybody.
I do, actually, funny enough, I do.
And we'll put her up on the website too, in our book section.
Can you see that?
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Great.
So self-compassion, I think she has a follow-up book that she's written. And I listened to the audiobook version, even though I have the physical copy. It's just easier as a busy mom. And I appreciated so much of her research. And so I do encourage anyone attending and anyone talking to families, working with families, to encourage them to look into this topic more, because I do think it's quite a complex topic that can't be distilled down to just one concept. I think there are like 3 main parts of self-compassion, and I can't really name them right now because I don't know them well enough. So I think that's just another area to explore.
Right. And I'm really glad you made that point, that, you know, we all kind of know this, but sometimes we forget it, that our kids learn at least as much from what they see us do as from what we say to them or tell them to do, right? So, I mean, if a child is watching us and watching us make a mistake and then own the mistake and you know, and talk about that, okay, well, I'll do that differently next time, or some of that kind of language, then that's going to make it okay for them to make a mistake and also say I made a mistake, right? So we forget that there's just so many things that we're modeling all the time. So I'm glad you made the point that that's one of the big ones, right? That if we can, you know, not be perfect, and then what happens in the after I wasn't perfect, you know, and what did my child learn from that? Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to thank the two of you so much for making even more time today to be with us and talk about this. It was great, you know, having you here and listening to you guys talk again. Just so everybody knows, you know, officially the first episode launches today, and then we're gonna drop another episode on the 15th of each month, not December, but each of those other months. So, you know, hopefully you'll look forward to those and maybe even give us some feedback. We'd love to hear that. You can always send us an email on the website, through the website email. I want to give a big thank you to Katie. You can't see her. She's behind the logo there. But thanks, Katie, for, you know, managing all that website stuff for us and the social media stuff, and for all the technical stuff today. We really appreciate that. And I just want to let everybody know too that our October Lunch and Learn is going to be on the 19th. That's a Wednesday. And we're going to have Shelley Marks and Jan Ranson from the Manitoba Daycare Office join us that day. And they're going to talk about the movement in early childhood education, particularly in Manitoba, towards a, you know, relationship focused work and away from a behavior management approach. So if you can mark your calendar for that, that's going to be a really interesting discussion too. We've got about 2 minutes. If anybody has a question or a comment for these ladies before they leave us, I'm going to throw that open. So if you have a comment or a question or anything, just unmute yourself and let us know. I know there's some comments in the chat. Oh, and thanks. Sayma has put Kristen Neff's name and the name of the book in the chat as well. So that's great. And yes, talked about when they'll be released. So again, that's going to be on the 15th of each month. Okay, I think that's it, folks. We said we would stick to our hour, and I know everybody has to get back to work. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Sayma. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Katie. And hopefully we'll see you guys next month. And give us a listen and give us some feedback. Okay, take care, everybody.